Hi, sir. Welcome to the Whitebirdtrails.
Thank you.
It's indeed a pleasure to have you. Before we start, I would like to give a small introduction view to people who are watching. Dylan Mohan Gray is an Indian and Canadian filmmaker who has films like Fire in the Blood, From Durban to Tomorrow, and Kings of Good Times to his credit. Fire in the Blood, his first documentary, is a film depicting the deliberate obstruction of access to low cost medication for HIV/AIDS to people of Africa and other third world countries by multinational pharmaceutical companies through patent monopolies and lobbying by several first world countries. From Durban to Tomorrow is a documentary on the future of public health advocacy that premiered at MIF, Mumbai International Film Festival 2020. And King of Good Times is a film that features as part of Netflix's anthology Bad Boy Billionaires as the first film. Welcome, sir, and thank you so much for being a part of this program.
My pleasure.
Sir, at the very outset, I just wanted to say that the first film that you made is so incredible, it's so potent and so important for our times. I wanted to start with that. Um, there were a couple of things that I wanted to ask with respect to that. In one of the interviews, you had said that the genesis of that film came from an article that you had read in the economic times, and since most of the people who are involved right now in Whitebirdtrails are either film students, cinephiles, or people who want to dabble into filmmaking eventually. So how did that how did an article lead to an entire film? What was your process like with respect to research, with respect to gaining access to people, and the likes of that?
Well, yeah, actually, it wasn't the Economic Times, it was The Economist. I was working on a film in Sri Lanka back, actually, it goes all the way back to 2004. And I read this article, and in the article, he talked about the moves made by Dr. Yusuf Hamid to help break down the barriers of the blockade of low-cost AIDS medication to Africa. And I was very impressed by what he had done, and I was quite surprised that I hadn't heard about it before, because I'm generally fairly well-informed person. So that sort of piqued my curiosity. And then I had the opportunity to meet Dr. Hamid here in Mumbai when I came here sometime after that. And I just found this story to be fascinating. And again, it was both interesting and there was a big curiosity factor for me in wondering why this story was not more widely known, because it seemed so important and so big and monumental. We're talking about something that changed the destiny of many millions of people, and also many countries, who were being decimated by the HIV/AIDS pandemic in the late 1990s and early 2000s. I mean, millions of people dying every year who could easily have been saved with existing medication that, for example, here in India was available in certain other developing countries, such as Brazil and Thailand, a number of other places. So the question was, the biggest need of the hour in terms of HIV/AIDS was definitely in Central and Southern Africa. The medication was hardly reaching anybody in those regions at the beginning of the millennium. And Dr. Hamid, along with a very interesting group of people from different parts of the world, came together to sort of figure out how to solve this problem. And they did solve the problem. I mean, it came too late for 10 or 12 million people, unfortunately, who died for no reason. But it did subsequently save many, many others. And India was a sort of a shining light in this story, which also was something that interested me a lot. Because it's not something we normally say about India, at least on the international stage. You very rarely have sort of good news stories of Indian leadership. And medicine is one area where there is, a lot to be said about the influence that India has in terms of making medicine accessible to people throughout the world. So that was, there were a number of factors that made it very interesting to me. And then in terms of taking it forward, it was, a question of talking to people. I mean, like I said, I met Dr. Hamid. I met through him a couple of other people who were very instrumental in fleshing out the story for me and helping my understanding of it, because there really wasn't that much information available. There was no book or film about this topic. There were just sort of contemporaneous news reports, which were quite superficial and sort of the moment. So it really was a matter of talking to many, many people in different places, sort of on a chain of referral, and fleshing out the story, and then figuring out which of those people, would need to be part of the film. In fact, my impetus in researching this story initially wasn't with making a film in mind. I was just personally curious about it and personally fascinated by it. At some point, some friends of mine said, when are you going to make a film about this? You talk about it all the time. So, it hadn't dawned on me because, at that time I was not working in the documentary field. And it seemed to me that documentary was the proper way to actually tell this story. You couldn't really, it would not have the same impact as a fiction film. And also, it's a story of many different people who came together, and people became critical in the story at different times. So it wasn't just like sort of Munich, the Steven Spielberg film where the sort of butcher, baker, candlestick maker all come together at the same time. People kind of came into this struggle at various points, and then sort of took the baton for a certain time. And that, so that made it also very difficult to tell the story in a fictionalized form, because there was no sort of single protagonist or even group of protagonists that were all equally important at a specific period of time. So yeah, it was a lot of research. It was a lot of figuring out how the best way to tell this story was. And, it felt a great weight of responsibility because, as I said, I thought the topic was extremely important, and there had been no film or book about it. Something that, basically killed double the number of people as the Holocaust. So, we all know how many books and films have rightfully been made about that topic. So, there was a huge weight of responsibility. If anything kept me up at night, it was like just making sure I did justice to the story, and, feeling quite lost in many cases, because this was a kind of documentary that had basically never been made in India before, which was taking on a global issue. And so, there was not a community of documentarians and surrounding, accompanying people, technicians, et cetera, to really rely on. I really had to sort of figure things out as I went along. And luckily, at certain stages of the project, there were a few angels, from different places who sort of stepped in to help guide me and get me out of certain holes, let's say. So a lot of goodwill towards the project. A lot of people felt that it was important to tell this story, and especially important to tell it from a global South perspective and not the usual sort of Anglo-American or European perspective, because the story was the problem was largely solved by the global South for the global South. So India played a big role. Like I said, Brazil, Thailand, they played a big role in helping their fellows primarily in Africa, who were most affected by this problem, and Africans themselves, of course, played a massive role. It took a lot of people. You're talking about trying to come up against the most powerful governments, the most powerful corporations in the world, who control the media messaging, who have immense amounts of money, billions and even trillions of dollars. And even the AIDS activist community at that time, which was a largely white male community, was not very interested in sorting out the issue on behalf of people in poor countries. They were very focused on their own communities in their own countries, and didn't really think it was that important, with very few exceptions. So you couldn't even say that the people who were the heroes of this story could not even really rely on solidarity and an activist network, from those people who were working on AIDS, and many of whom had a very big media platform, because there was a lot of interconnectivity with the entertainment industry, with Hollywood, music industry, etc. With the AIDS movement at that time.
The film makes you feel helpless. Then, it makes you believe in the good of, humankind. And then for a second, it leaves you feeling helpless again. And then it makes you go through these, field of emotions and what I really, personally, I really liked about the film was that even though there were snippets of people who were struggling with the problem, that wasn't taken as the, a lot of times, a lot of films that are of, say, for the lack of a better term, human interest variety, tend to take, say, the patients and the victims, and then they tend to expand on their stories. But this, I felt, was taking it head on, taking people who were against it for it completely head on. So I really wanted to thank you for making this film. It's so important, sir.
Thank you.
Uh, I also wanted to know, sir, South Africa came from a legacy of apartheid, and there were governments which knew that these restrictions would basically kill their own populations, which were probably black majority, who did not have access to as much money or resources. So despite that, how did a anti-apartheid government why did they maintain these restrictions on cheaper drugs?
So it's a big topic, but I'd say in a nutshell, the world trade system is strongly biased and skewed in favor of the wealthiest countries. And the governments of those countries are very, very heavily influenced by lobbying by the biggest corporations and industrialists, not very different from India in that respect. But it's more on a global scale. The pharmaceutical industry's power is derived not from science, not from research. It's derived from political influence. So they spend a huge amount of money, time, effort, maximizing their political influence in countries like, in particular, the United States, but not just. They have a very big influence in certain other countries with large pharmaceutical industries, like the UK, Switzerland, Germany, France. Those would be the key players, even Japan. So the problem for the African countries then becomes, you want to save your people, you want to give them access to medicine, but you've got a case where, the government of countries like the United States will literally threaten you with sanctions if you try to help your people survive. And crippling sanctions, and also canceling foreign aid, which for many African countries is an important part of their budget. Even in India, it is. So these things don't happen in front of the cameras. They happen behind the scenes, and there's a lot of deniability built into it. But what is very well known in the case of South Africa is that Al Gore, who was vice president of the United States at that point in time, running for president very clearly, and Bill Clinton was the president at that time, which is quite ironic given how the story played out. But he went to South Africa and he threatened the government of South Africa with crippling economic consequences if they tried in any way, shape, or form to get accessible, affordable drugs for their population. And that was the most affected country in the world by HIV, India being second. So the thing is that the other mechanism, which is mainly used international organizations, and primarily is the World Trade Organization, the WTO, which is based in Geneva, it is basically set up as a mechanism for rich countries to bully poor countries and middle income countries. India is considered a middle income country, which is kind of strange considering it has probably more impoverished people than all of Africa put together, but still categorized as middle income country. So the richest countries will bully almost all the other countries of the world using these mechanisms, and that's why it's been set up, and that's how it works, and it's been very successful in doing that.
This is even before TRIPS was placed that these sanctions were being done.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, this was the 1990s. So basically, that Clinton was the president between 1992 and 2000, and TRIPS had come after that. So yeah, we're talking about pre-TRIPS here.
So you have a history, your academic background in history.
Yes.
You graduated in history and you did your post graduation. I wanted to know how a background in a subject like history informs your storytelling, informs your approach to cinema, or if it does at all.
It definitely does. And, actually, sometimes people say to me things like, it's so strange that you are trained in history, you're a historian, and now you're making films. It's such a big transition, but for me, it's not at all. I mean, I think I also teach, in my former graduate school in Europe, Central European University. I've been teaching, connections between film and history. But, the job of filmmakers and historians is in many ways very similar. We do a lot of research, and we create narratives, and those narratives have to hold together based on they have to hold up. I mean, in terms of first of all truth, if you're talking about nonfiction filmmaking, and also they have to be persuasive, comprehensible to the audience, and I like to make films that would have a certain impact. So that's something that you have to bear in mind. How do you achieve that? And for me, also very important, and I think in history as well as in filmmaking, to not preach to the choir, but to actually try to bring people into the conversation who are not naturally inclined to necessarily be sympathetic to your point of view. I just think that's a much more interesting approach. And I also feel like, there's not a lot of utility in preaching to the choir. It doesn't excite me intellectually or, as a storyteller either. So I would much rather actually, I don't want to necessarily change people's minds, but actually give them a different perspective that is compelling and persuasive to them, that might make them reconsider some of the views they hold. Because you have to understand how people form their views. They're heavily influenced by a lot of regressive forces. I mean, especially, if I say in India, the media landscape is a highly regressive landscape. So that, people might think that, I have a lot of information and therefore I form my opinions on that information. But that is very rarely the case. In fact, the information is heavily filtered, heavily doctored. And so, we as filmmakers, I think, have a special role in shedding light on things where there's no light being shone. And, Fire in the Blood is actually a good example of that. Whose interest was it to tell that story? And whose interest was it that story not be told? The latter group is much larger and much more powerful, well-resourced and influential. So, those are things you always have to bear in mind. The public is not, I don't think there's a lot of evil people out there in the public who naturally are hateful and want to hurt others. But, there's a lot of information being directed their way, which makes them incline often to that viewpoint. And, it's our job as historians, as filmmakers, as writers, as people who are involved in communication, to try to mitigate that and to try to, like I said, shine a light in areas where there's no light being found, and use a different lens. And you have to have a certain amount of empathy and love in your heart, to do that, because otherwise you'll just get very angry, and anger it's not very useful in terms of changing things for the better. I mean, it has its place, but if you're just operating from a place of anger, you are going to probably be met with anger. So, that's how I think of it anyway.
This point that you spoke about, having empathy enough to be able to channelize your energy. Like anger is not enough. So
No.
do you feel, would you like to elaborate on that? Because I think it's really pertinent for people like us who are just starting out. And like with example,
I mean, let's say, let me just sort of try to cut to the chase, because I know, I mean, I've done a number of panels like this, and I know that a lot of people who log on, or will log on later in Facebook and what have you, are people that are starting out their careers or considering careers as filmmakers or somehow in the film industry. And I think, the paradigm is, you have options, different routes that you can choose, and you can choose several routes, but you're not locked into one or the other. But one of the things, I hear a lot from people is that they want to sort of make use of the the platforms that have sort of come to the fore in recent times. And if you look at a Netflix, for example, I'm very happy that Fire in the Blood is on Netflix. It wasn't made for Netflix, and it was very much I made the film I wanted to make. It took a very long time, and it took a lot of effort, and it cost me a lot of things over the period. But one thing I'm very happy about is I did make the film I wanted to make, that I thought was important to make. And the first and foremost, I made that film to set the record straight and to create a record, because there was none. And in the absence of a record, things will be lost. Lessons of humanity and history will be lost. And of course, then the record then becomes also perverted. In the absence of a proper factual account with the key protagonist, that as I said, there are a lot of people who had a vested interest in that story not being told in a compelling way or a convincing way. So it was very important to create a document that could stand the test of time. And I'm very happy the film continues to be extremely relevant, especially now, of course, with what's happening in the world with COVID, et cetera, but also, widely viewed both on Netflix and, with special screenings, that happen all the time in all corners of the world. So I'm really, really grateful for that. And I think the film deserves it, to be honest. It's not that I deserve it. I think the story and the people in that film are very, very strong, protagonists, and they really give you a lot of feeling of power and hope about being able to change things in the world, not just in that kind of health area or political area. I mean, in any area. We have protagonists in that film who seemingly had no power whatsoever, but because truth and justice were on their side, were able to actually change the world in an extremely meaningful way. So that's something that I think is very strong. And if you want to sort of reach out beyond the echo chamber of whatever your echo chamber may be, and to have a platform like a Netflix, you're not going to, I mean, you have to take a big tent approach in a way. You have to be able to do something that has a wide appeal. And of course, being entertaining is part of that as well. I mean, I'm not saying it has to be sort of song and dance routine, but you have to bear in mind that, again, if your objective is not to preach to the choir and just tell them what they want to hear and sort of package their talking points, then you have to, what I call, use like a spoonful of sugar, let's say. So if I'm making a film about Vijay Mallya, that film is actually about much more than Vijay Mallya, but people will watch it because it's about Vijay Mallya. And in the process, they will experience a lot of things and think about a lot of things that, if I made a film about, pre and post liberalization capitalism in India, or, the changing views around alcohol in India, those people would not watch that film, because that topic would not jump off the page for them or jump off the screen for them. But because I can sort of filter it or direct it through the conduit of something that they have an innate interest in, then it opens up a canvas to have some very, very interesting conversations. So this is the thing. I mean, but that doesn't mean that's the only way of doing it. If I look at From Durban to Tomorrow, for example, see that's a film which was made with a very different kind of target, a different type of approach. It's a film that is much more directed towards people who are in their daily lives have some occupation with the idea of human rights and of global health and how these two things fit together. So, it's a film that is much more likely to be programmed at human rights film festivals, for example, where people have a sort of baseline interest in human rights and connection to it. And it's a film that will be used in a lot of, and is being used in a lot of advocacy work with policymakers, with the medical community, with the activist community, et cetera, et cetera. So, it's a different approach. There's not a one size fits all. It depends, I think as filmmakers, every single project, the first question you ask yourself is, why am I making this film? Who is it for? And what is it meant to achieve? Because, when I ask people, so when people come to me with projects, either because they want me to be part of the project or they want mentorship or advice, that's what I asked them. I said, who is your audience? And, oftentimes people with filmmakers will say, it was really for everybody. And of course, you want your films to be for everybody, but that actually is not a useful answer. You have to really understand who your audience is and what do you want to achieve. Now, and then you work backwards from there. It's not enough to have an interesting idea or an interesting topic, because the distance between idea and film is very long, So unless you have a very clear concept of who your audience is, why you're making it for, what you want them to feel, what you want them to take away. Do you want your film to be a conversation starter? Do you want it to be the last word? What is your objective? It doesn't have to be a political objective or a social objective. It really just has to be a filmmaking objective, which oftentimes does translate into either a political. When I say political, it's a small p political. It doesn't mean like, oh, I want people to vote for a certain party. It might mean I want people to sort of think about, like, I wrote an article some time back, which is sort of recirculated recently, that was inspired by, I saw how people, in Europe were denigrating the refugees that were coming from the Middle East. That refugee wave came, and I was like, that made me think about my mother. My mother was a refugee, right? So I wrote about it. I felt it was important to make some people think, okay, like, these aren't faceless hordes. These are human beings with individual stories and experiences. And my own mother was one of them, So if somebody can read that and be like, okay, I can look at this slightly differently, that's a valuable thing. So, we do that. Those are, I think, healthy objectives for filmmakers. And, the thing is also, if you're a filmmaker and you go through a lot of ups and downs in getting your projects made, if the project is really personally important to you, it gives you a lot of energy that will sustain you through those difficult periods and those challenges, because there will be a lot of people saying, not interested, a lot of doors slammed in your face, not going to help you, we don't think it's good, it's dangerous for you, all kinds of things people will say, So I think to anybody that wants to make films, that actually make sure you do something that you personally are very strongly invested in. And then, that gives you a lot of power and strength, and it enables you to sort of ride the wave of a lot of obstacles and negativity that will come your way.
Who have been your influences in terms of filmmakers and films across cinema movements or across decades?
So, I actually am usually quite hesitant to say such and such a person has been my influence, because it sounds like I'm comparing myself to some great people who are much more talented than me. But, there have been people that films that have sort of constantly I've come back to me, let's say, that have been very important in my life. And I would actually mention 4 films, all of which, interestingly, are nonfiction films, which then when I say interestingly, that's because most of my career, I've not worked in nonfiction. Most of my career was working in fiction, feature films, and commercials. So, it's funny that the films that actually had the greatest influence, I would say, on me, happen to all be nonfiction films. And two of them I really experienced in school, in college, and and saw initially in during my time in university, and then wrote about them, studied them, watched them many times. One was a Russian film, a Soviet film, called The Man with the Movie Camera, directed by Dziga Vertov, which is made in like around 1930, I think. And that was just, I think, a film that I just caught my imagination, and I just thought it was incredibly beautiful, innovative, and unpretentious. And it basically told the story of a city over the course of a day, which has been emulated many times, but it was a completely different type of filmmaking at that point in time. And it was just an incredibly beautiful piece of cinema, which never fails to inspire me. And I've been lucky enough to see remastered beautiful prints of it on the huge screens, and it's incredibly inspirational and life affirming work. There's a film by Chris Marker, which is called Sans Soleil, which is French for sunless, and that is sort of a filmic essay, I would say. And I made a similar type film, which was very unsuccessful, but when I was in university as my thesis project, but very, very much inspired by that, the sort of essay, and also using the sort of dialectical approach of having different imagery and different stories sort of create a new reality, which it sounds like a pretentious thing, but it's not. It's a very, very exhilarating work. So that was one. To which I would add one fiction film, or at least a couple of them that were made by Miklos Jancsó, who was a Hungarian director, again, which I saw in university. I took a class in sort of Eastern European film of the 60s and 70s, and I was completely blown away by the films of Miklos Jancsó, who's a Hungarian filmmaker, to the point that I actually moved to Hungary, largely influenced by him, and lived there for quite a long time. In fact, I started working in the film industry in Hungary, in Budapest. So I mean, it was just I was just amazed by the power of the what he called the the off-screen space. So it really made you question like what people choose to put in front of the camera, and in a very powerful way, and beautiful. I mean, extremely beautiful cinematography, performances, and music, and so that had a huge influence on me. Then in modern times, let's say recent times, when I was making Fire in the Blood, I decided, like I said, that the documentary was the best format to make that film, but I didn't know what was really happening in documentary. So the first thing I did is I went to a big documentary festival in the UK, which sadly doesn't exist now, but was called BritDoc, and it was superb. And all the filmmakers were there, and it was a very sort of community of documentary people. I just watched all the films, took lots of notes about what people were doing. And the film that had a big influence on me was a film called Taxi to the Dark Side, which is made by Alex Gibney, who's a really sort of senior documentary filmmaker, very prolific. Some people might know his film Enron, The Smartest Men in the Room, which is an amazing film as well. And in fact, his company, Jigsaw, was a co-producer on Bad Boy Billionaires. So it's sort of the circle closing, because they were the ones that sort of created the format of a series, doc series like Bad Boy Billionaires, through the 30 for 30 films they made for ESPN, which are sometimes available on TV here on ESPN Sony, and also the Dirty Money series, which is on Netflix, which has been extremely influential and well received. So Bad Boy Billionaires was sort of conceived along the same lines as Dirty Money. And their company, Jigsaw, has been, or Alex Gibney's company, has been sort of at the forefront of kind of creating that type of format. So he made the film called Taxi to the Dark Side. It's about the U.S. military and the abuse of prisoners in Iraq and Afghanistan. I think the film came out in around 2007, 2006. It won the Academy Award for Best Documentary. But what really influenced me very strongly about that film, which I actually kept in mind when I was making Fire in the Blood, is that they didn't try to hype up the subject matter, because the truth was so strong and the truth was so powerful. You didn't have to convince people that it was powerful. You didn't have to have a very bombastic, polemical approach to it. He let the truth kind of speak, And that for me was very, very strong. Because like I said, anger is not a good way to sort of bring people into your tent. So it was a very civilized tone to a completely barbaric subject. And I tried to do that with Fire in the Blood too. I never actually planned to use any voiceover in the end, because the topic was there were so many moving parts. I did require a certain amount of voiceover in the film to sort of, pull those things together. But I tried to keep the tone very, very neutral and very fact-based, not use a lot of adjectives. And, that was very much inspired by Taxi to the Dark Side. And I'd say in recent times, the documentary film that, or just generally of any film, I'd say that has influenced me a lot, or not influenced me, but it really inspired me, is a film called I Am Not Your Negro by Raoul Peck, which is available on Netflix also, and was also nominated for the Oscar for Best Documentary. An absolute incredible film, so beautifully crafted, so beautifully conceived. Again, it's a sort of voice of civilization that comes across so strongly, and really celebrates, I think, the thinking struggle, let's say, in that case in particular of James Baldwin, who is a sort of leading African American intellectual of earlier times. But it's just such a exhilarating, beautiful film. When you see films like that, you realize how rare that caliber of film really is.
I also wanted to ask a little bit about how you got into films. There are a lot of questions I want to ask, but it's important because, we tend to look at journeys of filmmakers and then associate or disassociate our journeys. So could you share how you got into films after your graduation? And
I started acting in theater when I was a kid. So I acted in a lot of plays, musicals, commercials, and I really loved acting. But at some point, I started to become more interested in being behind the scenes, let's say, writing and directing plays. I was very active in theater. It was something that gave me a lot of joy. And I came from a small town. I didn't really see people around me that were working in that field. So it didn't seem like something that I could think about doing professionally. So it was, I thought it might be my hobby. And then when I was about 12 or 13 maybe, my school had got like a video camera, basically to record assemblies and sports fixtures and stuff. So I sort of volunteered to record those things in exchange for being able to use that video camera for my own purposes when it wasn't being used for school purposes. So with some friends, we started making these kind of horror movies, just for fun, really. It was really just a kind of schlocky horror movie, because we were all big horror movie fans at that time. There were, it was sort of golden age of horror. And so yeah, that was the start of the filmmaking journey. And I kind of got away from it. I mean, I made a couple of films like that that were very amateurish and, pretty much, I mean, they were sort of made for fun. I mean, nobody had any pretensions about it being any kind of great art by any means. And then when I went to university in the US, I just happened to live next door to a woman who was studying filmmaking, who was very interesting person, and who was excited and very enthusiastic about it. So, I was like, oh, I mean, I didn't really know that much about the film studies department at the university. So she was telling me about all the courses and the professors. And then she was like, you should come and, we're shooting some student films, come and help us out, be on the crew. If you need, we might need an actor as well. So do that. And I was also acting in college theater plays. So I started acting in these student films and being on the crew, and many of those people that I sort of helped out at that time ended up becoming professional filmmakers, and some of them have become pretty big professional filmmakers. So what happened is they sort of graduated university, and then they started doing independent, very low budget independent films, after they'd graduated. And so, a couple of friends and I who had worked with them on the student films, were called to sort of be on the crews for those films during vacation times, et cetera. So we started working on these film crews like that. And, it was all very low budget, but, and, kind of did everything, whatever was required. They'd give you some title, some credit, but basically you did kind of whatever needed to be done. That could be anything from setting the lights to, stopping traffic to, photocopying scripts or, holding the boom mic, or sometimes acting in some role or being an extra, or all kinds of things, So worked on some films and lots of music videos like that. And that was sort of a lot of fun, great energy, great people. And then, like I said, my graduation film from university, I decided to make a documentary, which was, I'd mentioned I'd gone to Budapest and to Hungary as an exchange student. And so that was there when the Berlin Wall fell down and the whole communist bloc in Eastern Europe sort of collapsed. So I decided to make a documentary film about what happened in the year following that to people that I had known in 3 cities, which was Budapest, Bucharest, and Sofia, which is the capital of Bulgaria. So I made that a documentary film about that topic, just sort of revisiting people I had known in those 3 cities and what happened in that year. And many of your viewers would have probably seen a very famous film called Germany Year Zero by Roberto Rossellini, just sort of very iconic film about the Italian neorealist post-war film movement. And so I had titled this documentary Another Year Zero, based, sort of, this was year zero after the fall of communism in Eastern Europe. So the film, like I said, was not like particularly successful because it was very overambitious, but it was a very interesting process to make it. Taught me a lot about, keeping your focus, in a documentary and really understanding, like I said, what it's meant to achieve, what it's really about, who the audience is. Those questions, actually, the more you define them, and I think, a lot of people, academics, will also identify with that, because one thing you hear a lot from people that are writing their master's thesis or their PhD dissertation is the same thing. You start with a very big topic, and that will drive you nuts because you will have so many possible angles to approach that from that you can't focus. So I think it's very important in filmmaking to have a very, very clear focus on what it is you're doing, what it really is about, what you hope to achieve, what the heart of your story is. Because the bigger the topic, it might be very interesting when you're sort of talking to people who are like, oh, that's really interesting. It's like, oh, the history of civilization, amazing, but actually that's going to screw you completely, when you come to making films, because there are a million different angles you can take on that, and you end up with a big hodgepodge of nothingness. So, that film kind of taught me that very well also, because I was young, of course. I was like just graduating from university. I thought, look, I was going to make the great film like Sans Soleil, but I didn't have the rigor, the intellectual rigor, and the self-awareness and the filmmaking technique or skill to do that. So end up being a failure, but in many ways has been very instructive. In every failures, I mean, like every graduation speech always says, the failures are the things that actually really help you more in many ways than the successes, because those are very strong lessons, and you can definitely apply them going forward.
I had a couple of questions about King of Good Times, and I think I'll just bundle them in one. I somehow felt that there were moments of sympathy for Mr. Vijay Mallya, for the very reason that India is a deeply conservative kind of a country where they don't anybody who has an image which is slightly away from theirs, slightly away from the mainstream, is brought under scrutiny far easily. Did you fluctuate while working on it? Did you fluctuate between this? Although in the film, one of the people do say that he is a fugitive, he has done wrong, but there are several others. Like, did you fluctuate while you were working on this and while you were putting it together on the edit table of how the arc and what you wanted to say and which side you wanted to be on? Did you struggle with that, or was it like a straightforward kind of a thing?
I think it's an interesting project for me because, the first time I've really done a film that I didn't have any particularly strong views on the subject at all, quite honestly. In fact, what happened was Netflix, came to me and said, we're making a series of films, and there's another series as well, which has not been released yet, but that was also part of the mix. And they sort of, said, we really want you to be part of this. So, here are the topics that we are looking at. And, are you interested in any of these? And if so, which ones? So I had choices of what I would do. And I had just had another project get delayed. So the timing was very good. I did want to be part of it. And I'd also been talking to Netflix about a lot of projects, or a number of projects. So I felt like it would be good for me to say yes to this because, it's the first time they've actually come to me and offered me something. I don't want to say no because we're in the process of forming a quite good partnership or relationship, let's say. So, I did my own research about, the topics that I thought were interesting. And actually, I was not inclined to do the film on Vijay Mallya initially because, I've sort of been here in Bombay during the sort of height of his notoriety. And I just didn't find him to be a very interesting character. And I thought that, if I did do it, unless it would be something surprising, there was no point in doing it because, there'd been a lot of coverage of it. If you're just going to do the same thing, it seemed kind of pointless. But when I started doing my research and talking to people, and I did have contacts who knew people around him quite well, and some of whom also knew him and knew his family and knew his story, or knew sort of highly placed employees of his very well. And I started to change my mind about the story. I thought actually became much more interesting, both him as a person and also, the things that, as I mentioned before, the things that could be touched upon by telling his story, so that was, that's, and also I just felt there was when I was talking to people here in the city, it was really struck by the fact that everybody I mentioned it to, whether they were 18 or 80, was like, wow, I'd love to see a film about him. There was just a huge amount of latent interest in his story. That really, kind of made an impression on me, that people felt like his story hadn't been told, actually. There was a lot of bluster from news channels, many of which have very strong agendas in various directions. And a lot of people said to me, this guy is actually he's a complete scapegoat, which I'm not endorsing that view, but it was interesting that a lot of people I wouldn't have expected to take that view. That was like what they came forward with. Yeah, I mean, that was all part of the process of deciding what to do. But like I said, I didn't have an agenda going in. It wasn't like, oh, we're going to nail this guy to the flagpole, or I'm going to say, this guy's actually like a really good guy, and this is all a bunch of lies. I actually decided to, just first of all, I mean, I believe in truth. I believe in facts, and I believe in my own instincts, human instincts. So, what? My research and my conversations and my interactions and my reading of all the materials around this case and this person's journey, strongly indicated to me that this is a guy that has a lot of good qualities and a lot of bad qualities, and and like most of us, actually, I mean, human beings tend to be shades of gray rather than fully black or fully white, and okay, he may have been currently painted as sort of public enemy number one, but in earlier times, he was extremely popular and beloved, not just by his employees and the people that are close to him, but by the general public. There were periods when he was really one of the most popular people in this country, and highly respected in certain ways, and in part because I think a lot of people sort of wrote him off as a rich kid and party animal. when he became known as the King of Good Times. But then when he launched Kingfisher Airlines, people were blown away by Kingfisher Airlines. They just loved it. And I remember that period very well. And so a lot of people felt badly because they thought they'd really underestimated him and sort of not given him the credit that he deserved. So they overcompensated by liking him even more than they would have otherwise. So, he was actually, he was voted the Entrepreneur of the Year, et cetera, all these kind of things. People had a great impression of him. They thought that he was a real innovator, and was really trying to do something in India that had never been done. Provide an unapologetic level of incredible customer service, et cetera, et cetera. Now, of course, we know that was sort of the root of his downfall, because he didn't keep an eye on the bottom line, and he didn't really listen to when people told him the Indian consumer is very price conscious. So, the top managers might pay double for a plane ticket on a premium airline, but the real business in India in air travel is not the top managers. It's all the employees, the middle managers, who are flying, crisscrossing the country every single day. And the top guys are not going to pay double for those guys. Those guys will take the cheapest flight that's available. So they might pay 10% more, but they're not going to pay 50% more. And, he just thought, okay, like he made it his extension of himself. He thought, if I just blow them away with spotless aircraft, incredible service, great food, they'll come around. They'll think like I do. But, the Indian consumer doesn't think that way. And, and many people just can't afford to think that way. They can't afford, for a 2-hour flight or an hour and a half flight, it's nice to have a great experience, but, are you going to pay double? Most people would say no. Even I probably would say no. So, you'd rather say, okay, I'll take the slightly crappy flight. And, when I get to wherever I'm going, then I'll go out for a really nice dinner or whatever with that money that I've saved, and I'll be happier, So, yeah, that was, part of his downfall. I think that, his case has got highly politicized. But the approach that I took, and I think the other filmmakers took in Bad Boy Billionaires, was, we're not actually telling the story of a scandal. We're telling the story of a human journey, and so that was very much the approach I took. And the human journey starts, really in childhood, and goes to the present day. And of course, there's a lot of that story yet to be written, and we'll see what happens. But I do have a certain amount of sympathy for him. On the other hand, there's no doubt that he did a lot of things which he shouldn't have done, and were very tone deaf, in particular to the poorly paid or the lesser paid employees in his airline. But do I think he's an evil guy and a mastermind criminal? Definitely not.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, what you said about what you were trying to do with this story and the things that you were wanting to touch upon, like they were extremely pertinent. Like the idea of image creation, the idea of the kind of image that he was trying to create, clutter breaking, and somebody succumbing to their own ambition. It's a tale to tell, I think.
Oh yeah, I think he will be remembered as having been a very influential person in the contemporary history of India, in terms of forming tastes and changing perceptions about many products. Obviously, like alcohol is the main one, because his company and his family's company was the biggest taxpayer in the country. That's quite remarkable. The level, of the level of input they have into the government treasury is immense. So just that fact alone makes him a very significant person.
Yeah, absolutely. Bad Boy Billionaires was it was put on stay by I don't remember. It was done by B. Ramalinga Raju. He had filed for a stay on the film, and so do you feel this, firstly, what do you feel about it? This kind of curbing of content, even on a net neutral platform like an OTT.
Well, let me say, I'll speak about this in general terms, because there's an ongoing court case, and one of the episodes of one of the films continues to be embargoed because of the court case. But I think it's very disturbing that films can be blocked in this way with no justification, honestly, and especially prior to release. I mean, this is something that the elites of the moneyed elites of India have done for a very long time with feature films, and they'll typically wait until a lot of money has been spent on marketing and promotion, and then right before the release date, or on the release date itself, virtually, they will file their case and their injunction and get the film stopped, knowing that they will cause a lot of harm to the producers by doing so, and create a lot of libel chill for filmmakers and storytellers. And ultimately, it's the country and the public that suffers from this. Producers will continue to make films, and they'll just make their films safer and safer and less kind of deep as time goes by. But the public will suffer, and the filmmakers will suffer, and the craft will suffer, and the reputation of Indian cinema will suffer. So, of course, I think it's a very bad thing. I understand that people have every right to take exception to films, but the films they haven't seen before. These films were like sued sight unseen by not just Ramalinga Raju, but by other people. And there was the delay. The release was delayed by over a month, and it was a great concern to all of us because we worked very hard on these films, and we think these films are very fair and factually based. And actually, in contrast with what you hear on the so-called news channels, where people would just spout all kinds of unsubstantiated rumors and baseless allegations all the time on a daily basis, and that doesn't attract lawsuits for some reason. But when by contrast, we have a series produced by one of the most reputable nonfiction production companies in the world, Minnow Films from London, which is extremely rigorous in its fact checking, and extremely rigorous in its commitment to the truth. It doesn't mean that you have to be happy about everything, but the truth is being displayed in these films, and it's undergone scrutiny not just by teams of lawyers, but by all kinds of fact checking standards that we have in making documentary films, which typically means you need, for every single fact, even facts that you would easily overlook, like what was on the menu on Kingfisher Airlines. If somebody says, oh, there was lobster thermidor on the menu, we have to go and check, can we get that menu? If we can't get that menu, then that bite does not go in the film, however harmless it may seem, because that is like the level of authenticity that we require. So yeah, it's unfortunate, but I think that we all expected it to happen, and certainly when we were making these films, there was a lot of interaction with legal teams in India, in other parts of the world, US and Singapore, etc., and the UK, in anticipation of lawsuits. It's unfortunate that the fourth film has still not been released, and I hope that comes to pass sooner rather than later. But in part because of purely selfish reasons, the series cannot be promoted, or they don't want to promote the series internationally until it is complete. And the series, is made up of 4 films. So currently there are only 3 films on the platform, and we're waiting for the 4th film. Once the 4th film is released, then Netflix is going to be able to promote the series internationally, which is very important because people in India know these characters, and therefore it's driven by word of mouth in India. But in other countries, the characters are not known outside of the Indian diaspora, or in Vijay Mallya's case, the Formula One fan audience knows his name or is familiar with him. So in order to reach the global audience that we want to reach, the promotion would be required, and that hasn't been able to take place yet. So, we're anticipating a very good response, and the people that have managed to see it because of word of mouth internationally, we've got very good response from them, but we haven't yet been able to get the press response, etc., that we would need because officially, in a way, the series is not complete. So hoping that happens soon.
Thank you so much, sir. I think we will open this to questions.
Hi, Dylan.
Hi.
Hi. So, really good session so far, and I feel really, really inspired by what you've, the way you approach your subject and how you want to say, how you see humans in these stories rather than stories as stories. So that's something which I have, as a principle, connected since my journey started as a filmmaker. So really
Great.
good to know that. So I have a little question. So you did mention that, like you did mention that you have to either choose that you make a like you have an end word, or you start a dialogue with your film, right? So when you enter a subject, if what should be your approach to keep it neutral and not let yourself be the judge of it? Like, is there a way to do that constantly?
That's a good question. I think, honestly, mm, I I would prefer to be fair rather than neutral, and I think there's a difference,
Mm.
because it's not like many times there's not an equivalency between two sides of a story. For example, if we're talking about sort of the Holocaust, you would not make an equivalency between the victims of the Holocaust and the perpetrators of the Holocaust. That would
Yeah.
be an incorrect thing to do, and it would be unfair. So neutrality can be unfair. You aim for fairness, meaning that I think is very important in nonfiction. Is I've seen it a lot, and you see it a lot in, even if you go on social media, for example, if you go on Twitter, and see something like any issue that is being discussed right now. Let's say these Arnab tweets, or Arnab WhatsApp things, or the case with Nidhi Razwan from NDTV, or whatever else might be happening now. If you see how people discourse on Twitter, there's a lot of cherry picking of facts. Or the farmers' protests, a perfect example, right? So there might be some restaurant that is providing pizzas to farmers, and then that will be attacked. It's like, oh, these aren't real farmers because real farmers don't eat pizzas. That is disingenuous, and it's not helpful in terms of actually coming to the truth about a story. You don't have to agree with people doing whatever they do, but it's damaging to villainize people and to pervert their story because you don't want to talk about the real story. You don't want to have a genuine discussion about why those people are there and whether there's a good reason for them to be there, or whether you think they are there for the wrong reasons. I mean, that I think is very important as a filmmaker. You have to divorce yourself from a political agenda to some degree, in order to be fair. And I think that what you win when you're fair is that people who are on the surface of things, on the other side of the argument, if nothing else, they will acknowledge that you're being fair, and that will mean something to them. Because they will then tend to take a lot more of your arguments into account than they would otherwise. And I got a lot of that back when I did Fire in the Blood. I got a lot of that back when I did the King of Good Times. The same thing. People were like, even people that didn't agree with the general tone or the arguments put forward in the film, they were like, I felt it was very fair. It was you went for balance, you went for fairness. Again, for me, not the same thing as neutrality. Neutrality is like just being like, hey, I don't know. I mean, this is one side and this is the other, and you're creating an equivalency between them.
So is there any, if I may just append to that question, is there any tool per se? Like, one is that to keep yourself in that frame of mind that I need to be fair. But then again, it's your moral compass of fairness.
You're right. I mean, I think you have to read. You have to research. You have to know your topic very, very well. And you have to be open to all kinds of viewpoints on that topic, even ones that you find initially repugnant. And some of them you will continue to find repugnant. but some of them you will see, like, I talked about Alex Gibney earlier, who is really a sort of a doyen of the documentary field in our era. And I attended a panel with
Alex,
him.
what,
And
sir? Sorry, I didn't catch the
Alex
name.
Gibney.
Alex?
Gibney, Gibney, Gibney. Yeah. So he had done Taxi to the Dark Side. He'd done Enron. He's done many, many other films. In fact, he's just got one that just came out about COVID and the whole COVID pandemic. So the thing is that I was not on a panel. I attended a panel that he did in Toronto at Toronto Film Festival, and he said something made a big impression on me, and I think is very correct. He said, when he was young and he was starting out as a documentary filmmaker, he would often try to cherry pick his contributions, his sound bites, his facts, his archive material to bolster his hypothesis, right? And we all do that to some degree, right? To sort of like reinforce your hypothesis. This is my hypothesis.
Yeah.
This is the evidence. These people say these 5 people say this thing. You've got this headline. You've got this piece of archive, and you might have a graphic with some statistic or something.
Yeah.
It's all serving your hypothesis. He's like, I would avoid. This is him talking, not me. He's like, I would avoid putting people who subverted my hypothesis in my films, because I felt that would weaken my film. That would weaken my hypothesis, right? And so what you see a lot of filmmakers do is, if they include people from the quote unquote other side of the story, they will actually intentionally take people who are not very credible, who are sort of jokers, who are sort of loudmouths, who are a little bit hysterical, semi-crazy, and da-da-da. And you see that a lot, you see that a lot in India as well. You see that a lot on the sort of very far right or far left press in the United States. Like they'll, if they want to attack a demonstration, let's say a CAA demonstration or a farmers demonstration, they'll go and they'll find some they won't ask the leaders of the protest to talk, and give their points and present their arguments. They'll go and find some random person who is not credible and not convincing and seems like a bit of a nutcase. They'll put that person on and, look, this is what the protesters are like. That's actually a very unethical, very disingenuous thing to do if you are actually interested in being truthful and fair. So you want the people who are on the other side, who are the best people, who are the people that are actually very intellectually strong, very intellectually convincing. And even though they might subvert your hypothesis to some degree, the fact that you have those people in your film will, first of all, give you a huge amount of credibility with the spectrum of people, and secondly, it will make your film stronger. You have to also question your hypothesis. There's no point in hiding from the truth. We make a lot of assumptions every day in life, some of which are wrong. And you be ready to change. Be ready to change your mind about certain things. And you can incorporate that into your film. And some filmmakers even talk about that in their films. They talk about their journey, that they have. You talk, like in fiction, we always talk about the arc of a character. We talk about the arc of a character. I mean, we have that in documentary too. I mean, I've tried to build the arcs of characters into my films. In Fire in the Blood, for example, we had this former vice president of Pfizer, and his arc in the film is very much like, speaking on behalf of the global pharmaceutical industry, very defensively at the beginning. But then there's a point at which he turns, because at some point enough is enough, and he realizes, I was actually doing something I believed in very strongly, but at some point it became wrong. The situation changed. It became wrong, and that is very powerful. Very powerful to see people turn. And in some cases, like I said, if filmmakers are themselves, in some instances, characters in their own stories, they will also at times incorporate that change of heart or that change of perception into their films, and that is also very powerful, because they're taking the audience along on a journey with them. The point is, like I said, the most important thing remains truth and fairness. The most important thing is not to prove your argument, because you can do that. You can have a very cherry-picked, strong, tight piece that is ultimately propaganda and is polemical. And that's a choice you can make. I just don't think you're going to convince a lot of people with that who are not already in your camp. So it is good to have those opposing voices. And like I said, if you want to find the fairness, if that's important to you, then it is incumbent upon you to really know your topic and to speak to everybody across the spectrum, even those, like I said, who you initially would sort of recoil from. If I'm making a film about the far right movement in the United States, I have to go and talk to these people and I have to listen, and I have to understand like what brought them to this place and what are they really trying to fight for? What are they really trying to achieve? Why are they angry about certain things? Is that really what they're angry about? Maybe there's something else that they're much more angry about, but they feel like they don't have the ability to express themselves about that matter. So they then use this one as a proxy, right? So, all of us are fallible. We're all human beings. I mean, I've seen people who were Nazis, skinheads, turn into advocates for racial justice. That's possible. People have those ability to change and to travel. Just yesterday, I think I watched the One Night in Miami on Amazon, which incorporates the story of Malcolm X. Malcolm X is somebody I have been very interested in for a long time. I've read loads of books about him. I've seen all the films and lots of archive about him. He's somebody that changed a lot in his life, at various different phases, because he was acquiring information and perspective as he went along, and he wasn't afraid to repudiate some of the things that. And it's very interesting reading the Autobiography of Malcolm X, which, if you haven't read it, is one of the great books. I mean, probably my favorite book of all time. I've read it many, many times. And the interesting thing in that book, as it goes through chronology, he's writing the book along with Alex Haley, who wrote Roots. And while they are doing that process, Malcolm X is changing his ideas about many, many things. And he doesn't, go back and change those earlier chapters. He leaves them as they are and incorporates his change of perception. He does try to rewrite his own history. He's owning his own history. And he's not even trying to justify it. He's, because as he worked with Alex Haley on those earlier chapters, he believed a certain thing. And in the later chapters, he's like, I no longer believe that thing. But he didn't go back and change, what he wrote about the earlier chapters. That's fascinating, actually, And
I think that's powerful.
It's very powerful and it's very honest, and that honesty is really, it's unusual. And that honesty, in a film is very impactful on people, because you just realize how rarely people get that kind of honesty. So I would say, that's something that you really want to try to pursue, to have that degree of honesty come across in your film, and that will win a lot of people over, even if they don't agree with much of the substance of what you're saying.
That makes sense, because as a fiction filmmaker, you always taught that your antagonist should not seem very sympathetic, or you lose the thing. So your protagonist should have all the sympathies and not your antagonist. So I think that's where we lose that in documentary or a reality-based film, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very simplistic view, I would say, for sure. I mean, because it doesn't conform. See, that's the thing. If I look at Bollywood, for example, I think that one of the things that actually makes Bollywood quite alienating in general, and I'm speaking as a gross generalization here, is that people are basically conform to type and they don't vary from that type. And that does not correspond with our own experiences of being human. Human beings are not like that. Like, I'm not a type. I'm a person. I have a lot of experiences. Things change me. I do things that I wish I hadn't done, et cetera, et cetera. I eat things I wish I hadn't eaten. I mean, all kinds of things like that. That's what it means to be human, and I think that, it's very important to bring that across in the films, and the audiences feel it because they don't get that enough. They get a lot of types and a lot of cardboard, two-dimensional sort of characterizations. So even if they don't know exactly why, they do respond to it, when they feel. So if you look at, if you're saying the fiction sphere, a film like A Separation, for example, why is it that film has such a huge impact on people? It's because they feel the humanity of the characters, so strongly, and they don't get that in films very often, and that's why it seems like startlingly refreshing. and it's not like a scenery chewing acting exercise. It actually comes across as so authentic, the way people express themselves, the way they lose their temper and say things they wish they hadn't said, all kinds of things like that, the situation of like that feeling like you're painted into a corner and having to come up with some kind of reaction. We all identify with that very strongly. So, the plot line is actually sort of incidental. It's really the humanity, the strength of humanity, the authenticity that comes across that makes it so powerful.
Hello, sir.
Hello?
Sir, my question to you is, what are the projects that you would be working on or are in the pipeline?
Well, there are always a number of them, and some of them sort of tend to be on the do list for a long time and nothing really happens, and others sort of move very quickly. And then now, because of what's happening in India in terms of the platforms, they sort of got religion, I think in part because of Bad Boy Billionaires and certain other productions, where they are, very keen now to do a lot of documentary series in particular. So then there are a lot of approaches that come on that front. Most of them tend to be true crime things, which I personally am not that crazy about. I mean, in part, why am I not that crazy about it? Because a couple of reasons. One, I kind of prefer to make films that sort of, as I said, are conversation starters, and also that are sort of about more than the story, than the story itself. They're sort of about bigger issues, bigger. There's a lot more meaning that can be attached to it, and I think true crime often doesn't have that. It tends to be about incidents which are interesting, and you want to see that sort of forensic examination of it and deconstruction of it. But at the end, when I watch true crime documentaries or documentary series, I'm often like, okay, that was really well made, that was really interesting, but 2 days later I won't be thinking about it, because it's sort of in the past. And also the other thing is that here in India, and not just India, but many other countries, I mean, I grew up in Canada, and it's the same in Canada, the thing that people think about when they think of true crime, that makes true crime documentaries and documentary series really work, is absent here, which you have in the United States, which is, all the interrogations are videotaped, the court, the trials are on video. If you don't have that, it makes it a lot more difficult to make an interesting film about a crime, because then you're really reliant on either you make a very boring interview-based thing, which is like a lot of talking heads, which is most people are going to find quite boring, or you're doing a lot of what we call reconstruction or dramatization, which personally, I mean, if it's very chunky in the film, I find like at some point, why are you dramatizing all this stuff in a documentary? If you can't tell it in documentary form, then better to make a fiction film about it, because half your film is dramatization. It doesn't really make sense. There are very few exceptions. Like, so a film like Touching the Void, if you haven't seen it, very strongly recommend Kevin McDonald's film, which has is sort of equal between dramatization and interviews. It's one of the only times I've actually seen that be used successfully. But then also from a production point of view, then you really have to approach it like making a movie. Or making a fiction film, and with the necessary resources, because otherwise it looks very cheesy and schlocky. So I get offered a lot of those kind of projects. I'm actually just about to sign up for a documentary series, 6-part series, which I can't really say too much about, but it is in the sort of contemporary history space, similar to Bad Boy Billionaires, but not about Bad Boy Billionaires or scams or anything. But so that's just about to go. And I'll be mostly working on that for the next 12 to 15 months.
So would we be seeing that on any OTT platform?
Yes.
Netflix?
You will, for sure.
You cannot say that.
No, well, the company is a big company that's doing it, and they prefer to actually, which is also preferable for me, is to actually make the film and then shop it around to the platforms. Because why I say it's preferable for me, because during, if you're doing it commissioned by the platforms tend to interfere a lot in the creative process, and that becomes like sometimes extremely frustrating. I mean, it's their prerogative, they own the rights and it's their job, but I would rather, if given the choice, I would rather not have that. I'd rather make it with the producers and then present our work to possible platforms, distributors, and what have you, because that means we have a better chance of making the project as we wish to make it. And this company has a very good track record of making excellent work. So I think I have a high degree of confidence that it will be an excellent production. And then I have a fiction film, which is a Canadian production, but it's actually set in Bombay. So it's really an Indian film, but it happens to be produced by Canadian people. So
What
that's been
stage
sort of.
is it at?
Pardon?
What stage is it at? Is it at the development stage?
We've got. I mean, I've been attached to this project for about 4 years, and it's now reaching. It's getting to the point where we are getting quite close to production. I think that will probably happen next year now. Could happen this year, but like I said, I'm sort of like my availability will be kind of less because of this other production I just mentioned. So I think we'd do it maybe the beginning of next year. We've written many drafts of the script, and now the financiers seem to be quite happy with it.
There's one question which I think Anita Gomti has asked. It says that, sir, I would like to know the strategies you take for your film distribution.
Strategies for film distribution.
Yeah.
It's this is a very rapidly changing landscape, to be honest. I mean, so like we did Fire in the Blood, already like 7 years have passed since we premiered the film, and the landscape has changed immeasurably during that period. So it's very fluid. Obviously now, like Netflix and other platforms have become very big players, and there's a lot of attraction to working with them. Which I would say are, first of all, that they often, are bringing the financing for the film in one pot, so it's not like you have to cobble. Previously, we were often with independent films and documentaries, you're cobbling together the financing from different places. And sometimes that's quite tricky because it's a bit of like a house of cards, where things have to come at certain times and you have to satisfy different masters. So there is a lot of benefit in getting the money from one financier, especially if they're also, the exhibition is sort of built into that. So, with Netflix, they're producing the film, then they release the film on their platform. So you don't have to worry about that part of it. You don't have to worry about whether you're going to make a sale. It's guaranteed, it's all built into the money that they give you, and you kind of become a service producer in the sense you're taking a fee for executing the project. And then, the thing with independent films also, like when I produce Fire in the Blood, it takes at least a year to sort of roll out the film. So, which is enjoyable to a certain degree because you're traveling all over the world to different film festivals and things. But at the same time, that's time you could be using to work on other projects. So the nice thing about, let's say a Netflix release is that it comes out globally at the same time. You spend a few weeks of doing your promotions and press, and then you move on to the next thing. And, and also because there's no business requirement after that. So you don't have to continue, like with Fire in the Blood, I would continually to make sales. You would charge screening fees. There's educational distribution. There's airlines. There's so many things, it's a lot of work to continually kind of tend to that, that project and what they call the long tail, which means, the business life of the project usually extends between 5 and 7 years and can be much longer if the film sort of is very impactful. So, that's what kind of most people are aiming for now, is to sort of get on the platforms, either with a commission project like Bad Boy Billionaires, or with a sale like Fire in the Blood was sold to Netflix, but that was after it had been distributed in lots of places. Now, most of the platforms now want exclusive deals. So that means if you sell to a Netflix, you're probably going to be giving up your right to sell to other people, or to have a theatrical release, or to, or educational distribution, all those kinds of things. So, it's tricky because in a way for independent films it's become more difficult in the sense that, do they pay enough to cover the cost of making that film truly, if they want an exclusive deal. And you don't know. So that in that sense, it's favorable to do a commission deal, because then you agree on a budget, and then they give you the budget, and then you make it, and then you sort of wash your hands of it and you're done. And you sort of the other aspect, which is very important, especially for documentary filmmakers and independent feature filmmakers as well, is that the benefit of being on a Netflix or an Amazon is you can reach a massive audience that you would not be able to reach otherwise, and they promote your film, and they get a lot of press for your film, so you're reaching a lot of eyeballs. And ultimately, as filmmakers, that's extremely important to us, that otherwise you're in a very niche kind of space, or even an echo chamber. And it is definitely satisfying to see to see people talking about your work and discussing the topics dealt with in your work, the narratives. Like when Bad Boy Billionaires was released, I went to a restaurant in Bandra, for dinner, and social distancing and everything. But literally, like, the tables on both sides of me were talking about my film. That was a great feeling. You don't get that a lot in the documentary space. So that's something that is really valuable, and I'm very happy that I had that platform with Netflix for 2 of my films. So I wouldn't underestimate the
Power of
benefit of that, or the pleasure of having that be the case.
Great. Okay. I think that's it, sir. No more questions from here. Thank you a lot for giving so much time. And this is it was such a wonderful discussion. So many things we spoke about, and I hope for everybody here and on Facebook who's watching, this has been a good watch. Thank you so much, sir. And we hope to see another from you super soon.
Okay. Thank you. My pleasure.
Thank you.